The conference room on the 42nd floor smelled like leather and quiet power. I had sat in rooms like this 100 times. But that morning I was wearing my old gray blazer, the one my wife had bought me at a department store sale 12 years ago, and the man across the table could not hide his contempt. My father-in-law had never respected me. Not once in 31 years. That morning, he was about to find out exactly who he had been disrespecting. My name is Robert. I am 64 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in Dayton, Ohio, with a vegetable garden in the back that my wife and I planted together the spring after our daughter was born. I drive a 12-year-old Chevy pickup that I maintain myself on Saturday mornings. I take my coffee black. I own 41% of Meridian Health Group, a private hospital network spanning 9 states, currently valued at just under $2 billion. My father-in-law, Gerald, had spent the last 3 decades believing I was nobody. Let me tell you how it started, and why I kept the secret as long as I did, and why I finally stopped. I met my wife, Diane, in the fall of 1993 at a community hospital fundraiser in Cincinnati. She was volunteering at the registration table. She had dark hair and a laugh that seemed to come from somewhere genuine, not from politeness. I was 32 years old and had just quietly closed the second round of investment on what would become Meridian. At the time, it was just 2 clinics and a lot of paperwork. I was not rich yet. I was working 18-hour days and eating sandwiches at my desk and telling myself it would be worth it someday. When Diane and I started dating, I told her I worked in healthcare administration. That was true. I just left out the part where I was one of the primary founders and the largest individual shareholder. She never asked for details. She was a teacher. She cared about her students and her family, and whether we had enough in the fridge for Sunday dinner. Money was not something she thought about the way some people do, like a scoreboard, like a measure of worth. She paid her bills and saved carefully, and did not particularly care what anyone drove or where anyone lived. That was one of the first things I loved about her. Her father was the opposite. Gerald Whitmore had built a regional insurance brokerage through a combination of hard work and harder elbows. He was a self-made man, and he made sure you knew it within the first 10 minutes of meeting him. His home in Indian Hill was immaculate and large, and positioned so that you could not miss it from the road. He wore his watch like a statement. He measured people by their zip code and their job title, and when his daughter brought me home for the first time in the spring of 1994, I watched him do that calculation in his head in about 4 seconds flat. The result was not favorable. I was driving a used Ford at the time. My apartment was small. I dressed neatly but not expensively. When he asked what I did for work and I said healthcare administration, he nodded with the particular kind of politeness that is really just dismissal wearing a mask. He asked if I was in management. I said I was involved at the ownership level. He seemed to hear the first word and not the second, because what he said next was, well, every industry needs its middle managers, I suppose. Diane touched my arm under the table. I smiled and said nothing. I had learned early in life that the most powerful thing in any room is the person who has nothing to prove. I had nothing to prove to Gerald Whitmore. I knew what I had built. I knew what I was building. And I had already decided, sitting at his dinner table that first evening, that I would never tell him, not to be cruel, but because I wanted to protect something that felt rare and worth protecting, a woman who looked at me and saw a man she wanted to build a life with, and a family that would be built on that, not on balance sheets. Diane and I were married in October of 1994. Her father gave a toast at the reception that was technically warm and fundamentally condescending. He talked about how Diane had always been idealistic, how she had always led with her heart, and how he hoped that would serve her well. He did not say the word mistake. He didn't have to. Diane told me later that night, when we were alone, that she was sorry for what her father had said. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. I told her I was the luckiest man at that reception. She leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "Me too," and that was enough. That has always been enough. We built our life in Dayton, not Cincinnati, which meant we were not in Gerald's daily orbit. That was intentional on my part, and possibly on Diane's too, though we have never said so directly. I commuted to Cincinnati twice a week in the early years. I took calls from our back porch. I signed documents at the kitchen table after dinner while Diane graded papers beside me, and we were quiet together in the way that people are when they are genuinely comfortable. Meridian grew. Quietly, steadily, without fanfare. By the early 2000s, we had 6 facilities. By 2010, 17. By the time our daughter, Natalie, graduated high school, Meridian was one of the 20 largest private hospital networks in the country, and I was, by any conventional measure, extremely wealthy. Natalie did not know. My wife did not know. My mother-in-law, a gentlewoman named Patricia, who made peach cobbler and asked thoughtful questions, did not know. Only my attorneys knew. My 2 original business partners, who had both cashed out in 2007, knew. My accountant knew and kept his discretion the way good accountants do, like a professional obligation and a point of personal pride. I want to be clear about why I kept the secret. I have turned this question over in my mind many times, especially in recent years, and I want to be honest about all the parts of it. The first part was genuine. I had watched money change people, and I had watched it change the way people were treated, and I had watched couples who built their relationships on shared wealth discover that the wealth was the load-bearing wall, remove it, and the whole structure came down. I wanted my marriage to be something that could stand on its own, something that was about us. And I believe it was. I believe Diane has loved me the way I hoped she would love me, not because of what I owned, but because of who we were together. The second part is harder to say. I kept it from Gerald because I did not want him to win. I did not want him to be able to say, years later, that he had always seen something in me, that he had sensed the potential, that his daughter had made a fine choice after all. I wanted to remain, in his eyes, ordinary. I wanted him to live in a world where he had been consistently wrong about me without knowing it. That is not a noble motivation. I am not proud of it, but it is the truth. The third part was about Natalie. Our daughter is 26 years old. She is a pediatric nurse. She drives a 6-year-old Honda. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Columbus, and she chose her career because she wanted to help children, and she has never once asked us for money beyond what we gave her for college. She is the best thing I have ever had any part in. I wanted her to be exactly who she is, and I was afraid, maybe irrationally, maybe not, that knowing what I was worth would change something in her that I did not want changed. Gerald had made his money the centerpiece of his identity. I watched what that did to the people around him. I watched it do something to Marcus, Diane's brother, who was 43 now, and had spent his whole adult life chasing a version of success he believed his father would finally respect. I did not want that for my daughter. I would have done almost anything to prevent it. So I kept the secret. For 31 years I kept it. And then Gerald made me stop. It was March, 14 months ago. Meridian's board had begun formal discussions about a public offering, not a certainty, but a serious conversation, and one that was generating quiet attention in financial circles. Gerald had apparently heard something. He had a friend on the periphery of a private equity firm that had approached Meridian about a secondary stake, and Gerald had done what Gerald always did. He had made inquiries, he had gathered information, and then he had used it. He invited Diane and me to dinner at his house. Just the 4 of us, Gerald, Patricia, Diane, and me. Patricia made roast chicken, and there were flowers on the table, and Gerald poured good wine, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. Gerald only deployed his hospitality this precisely when he wanted something. We ate and talked about nothing important for the first 40 minutes. Gerald asked about Natalie. He asked about the garden. He made a comment about my truck that was dressed up as a joke and was actually just a comment about my truck. Then Patricia took the dishes to the kitchen, and Gerald leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the particular expression of a man who believes he is about to demonstrate his superior intelligence. "I've been doing some reading," he said. "About what?" I asked. "Meridian Health Group." He paused to let that land. "There's been some discussion in the financial press. Possible IPO. Interesting company. Private, founder-led, very well run, from what I can tell." Another pause. "I had Henderson look into the ownership structure." Henderson was a financial consultant Gerald used and occasionally weaponized. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, but a kind of calm that comes when you have been waiting for something for a long time and it finally arrives. "Is that right?" I said. I was not asking a question. Henderson hit a wall, Gerald said. The holding structure is layered. Smart, actually. But he found a name attached to one of the parent entities. He looked at me. RJC Capital Partners. Ring any bells? My initials. Robert James Calloway. I know the name, I said. Gerald's expression shifted. He had expected denial, or confusion, or discomfort. What he got was stillness. That threw him slightly. He recalibrated. Robert, are you telling me that you have some connection to Meridian Health Group? I'm telling you I know the name, I said again. Diane was looking at me. I could feel it without turning my head. There was a quality to her attention in that moment that I had felt before during the years when I had gotten home too late and she had worried. During the one serious illness I had in my 50s, a kind of focused, quiet concern that is one of the most recognizable things in my world. I put my hand over hers on the table. Then I looked at my father-in-law. Gerald, I said, I was going to have this conversation with Diane before I had it with anyone else. That was my plan. You've moved that timeline up. What conversation? Diane said. I turned to her. This was the moment I had prepared for, and not prepared for, the one I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times, and knew no rehearsal would actually cover. I looked at my wife of 31 years and I said, I own 41% of Meridian Health Group. I have since the beginning. It's worth somewhere between $1.8 and $2 billion, depending on who's doing the valuation and what day of the week it is. The room was quiet. Patricia had come back from the kitchen. She stood in the doorway holding a dish towel. Diane looked at me for a long time without speaking. Her expression was not what I expected. It was not shock, exactly. It was something more complicated, like she was reassembling something she had already half-assembled, and was realizing the pieces fit differently than she'd thought. The whole time? She said. The whole time. Before we met? It was 2 clinics when we met. It became what it is now over the years. She was quiet again. Gerald started to say something, and she turned and looked at him, and he stopped. Why? She said. She was asking me. Just me. I told her everything. The version I told you just now, all 3 parts, including the part about Gerald that was not noble. I did not protect myself from that. I owed her the full truth if I was finally giving it to her, and partial truths are their own kind of lie. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she was still for a moment, and then she said, You should have told me. Yes, I said. I should have. Not about the money. About being afraid. She pressed her lips together. I would have told you that you didn't have to be afraid. I had to look away for a moment. There is a particular kind of thing that happens when someone shows you, quietly and without drama, that they are precisely the person you always believed they were. It does not make you feel vindicated. It makes you feel like you didn't deserve it. I know, I said. I'm sorry. Gerald had been sitting through this exchange with an expression I had never seen on his face before. The architecture of it was wrong. He was a man whose features were arranged by habit around confidence, and confidence had left the room. What was left looked, for the first time in 31 years, a little like an old man. $2 billion, he said quietly. Not as a challenge. Almost to himself. Approximately, I said. He looked at the table. He picked up his wine glass and set it back down without drinking. And you never said anything. No. All those years. Every dinner. Every holiday. He stopped. Started again. I said things to you. You did. I treated you like, yes. The word sat between us. Gerald was not a man who apologized. I had never heard him do it in 31 years. I watched him try to approach it and not quite get there, and I decided that was all right. Some distances are too far to cover in a single evening. Patricia crossed the room and sat down at the table. She reached over and put her hand on Gerald's arm. Then she looked at me and said, Robert, I am sorry. Not for him, he can speak for himself. But I am sorry on behalf of this family for the way you were made to feel. That undid me, a little. Patricia had always been kind. Her kindness had always sat in uncomfortable contrast to her husband's condescension, and she had never found a way to bridge that gap publicly, and I had always suspected she carried that. Thank you, Patricia, I said. Diane and I drove home mostly in silence. Not an angry silence, a full one, the kind that comes after something large has changed. About 20 minutes from home, she said. Natalie doesn't know? No. We need to tell her together. Yes. And I want to know everything. Not the financial details. I don't care about the financial details. I want to know the parts you thought I couldn't handle. You could have handled all of it. I know, she said. That's what I want you to say out loud. Every part of it. We told Natalie the following weekend. She came up from Columbus on a Saturday, and we made breakfast together the way we always did. Eggs and toast and coffee. And then Diane said, "Your father has something to tell you." And I told my daughter. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is this why you always drove that terrible truck?" I laughed. Genuinely. Diane laughed too. "The truck runs fine," I said. "Dad." Natalie looked at me with the particular expression she has had since she was about 9 years old, direct and patient, and a little like she is waiting for you to catch up. "Does this change anything?" "Like what?" "Like us. Like Sunday breakfasts. Like whether you're still going to call me at 7 in the morning to tell me what's growing in the garden." "Nothing changes," I said. "Then I think I'm okay." She paused. "I'm going to need a few days to think about the part where you've been quietly a billionaire this whole time, though. That's a lot to sit with." "Take your time," I said. "Also," she added, "I'm not taking any money." "I know," I said. "I raised you." She pointed at me like that was exactly the right answer. The IPO moved forward in January of this year. It was not something I could prevent. Even if I had wanted to, the company had grown beyond any single shareholder's ability to hold it in place. And frankly, it was the right move for Meridian's future. When the filing became public, my name appeared in the documentation as required. And for approximately 2 weeks, my phone received calls from people I had not heard from in decades. And I answered very few of them. Gerald called. I answered that one. He asked if we could have lunch. Just the two of us. I said yes, and we met at a diner near his house. Not a restaurant he would typically choose, which I think was intentional on his part, a kind of gesture. We talked for almost 2 hours. He told me about his own father, who had been a failure by any material measure, and had made Gerald feel the weight of that for his entire childhood. He told me he had built his brokerage not because he loved the work, but because he needed to prove something that could never quite be fully proven. He told me he had passed that need on to Marcus, and he knew it, and he didn't know how to undo it. He did not apologize in a direct sentence. Gerald is not built for direct sentences on difficult subject, but he said, "I was wrong about what made a man worth something," and he said it while looking at the table, and I believe he meant it. I told him I had not always been fair to him either. I told him that some portion of why I had never told him was not principle. It was spite. That I had wanted him to be wrong for 30 years without ever finding out. He deserved to know that. He looked up at that. Something in his expression shifted, not offended, but surprised, maybe by the honesty. He said, "I suppose we're a fine pair." "We've always been a fine pair," I said. "We just couldn't see it." We did not leave that lunch as close friends. We are not close friends now. But we left it as two men who had been honest with each other for the first time, and that is a foundation that can hold something, even if you're not sure yet what you want to build on it. There is something I want to say to whoever is listening to this, because I think it is the part that matters most, and the part that is easiest to miss. I do not tell this story to make a case for keeping secrets. I kept mine too long, and the cost of that was paid not by me but by Diane, who deserved to walk through her marriage with full knowledge of the man beside her. The right to that knowledge was hers, and I withheld it from her, even for reasons I believed were good, and that was wrong. She told me she forgave me. I am not sure I've fully forgiven myself. What I want to say is about what the money was not. It was not my identity. It was not the reason my daughter is who she is. It was not the reason Diane and I have made it 31 years with our respect for each other mostly intact. It was not the reason I know how to fix my own truck, or why I planted tomatoes this spring, or why the most grounding part of any week is Saturday morning coffee on the back porch with my wife, listening to the neighborhood wake up. The money is a tool. I have used it to fund a pediatric wing at one of our Ohio facilities. I have used it to endow a nursing scholarship program that Natalie helped me design, though she still won't take any of the money personally. I have used it to quietly pay off the mortgage of my wife's parents, because Patricia deserved that peace of mind, and Gerald, whatever his flaws, worked hard for his family, and I was in a position to give them something he could not. He cried when Diane told him. He didn't know I had done it. He called me that evening, and he could not finish his sentences, and I told him it was nothing, and he said, "It isn't nothing," and I said, "Let's say it is anyway," and he said, "All right." That was the closest we have come to the thing that might someday be friendship. The simple life was not a performance. The truck, the garden, the 3-bedroom house in Dayton, that was not a disguise. That was the life I wanted, and it is the life I have, and the number on the financial documents does not change the taste of a tomato. I grew myself, or the particular quality of the quiet on a Sunday morning when no one is asking anything of you. My father-in-law spent 31 years seeing someone who wasn't there, a lesser version of me that existed only in his assumptions. I let him. I could have corrected him at any point, and I chose not to, and we both lost something in those years that we will not fully recover. Do not let the people you love operate on incomplete information about who you are, not because the truth is always easy, but because the people who love you back deserve to be making their choice with full knowledge, and if you trust them the way you say you do, you should be willing to let them make it. Diane knew. She knew from the beginning that I was more than I appeared to be. She married me anyway, not because of the more, but in spite of not knowing the shape of it. She was braver than I was, and more honest, and she has been both of those things consistently for 31 years. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows. When the meeting was over, and the other members of the board had filed out, I stood at the glass for a moment, and looked at the city below, and thought about the morning in 1993, when I stood outside a small clinic in Cincinnati with a folder of documents and an idea and no certainty whatsoever about whether any of it would work. It worked, but that is the smallest part of the story.